This week on Information Technology Leaders, Bill Baxter, Chairman and CEO of Bsquare Corporation. Now here's your host, Laura Schildkraut.
Today's guest is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Bsquare Corporation. He's also a study in dualities. Just look at him and you'll see someone who was probably always in the majority. Yet he was a minority and an outcast in all the places he grew up, for one reason or another. After high school, he decided between pursuing either debate or welding. And through his career, his interest in temperament drove him towards being an exceptional coder as an individual contributor. But his talent and vision always moved him into management. He finally stopped fighting it and started his own company. Who would have thought? Please welcome Bill Baxter. So Bill, where were you born?
I was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
What are some of the results that you think of your being raised in Oklahoma?
Well, I lived there for about 5 years. My family hailed from the South, and that was as close to our family as we could get. And living there for 5 years, I think the biggest result I got was a Southern drawl.
And did that serve you well?
Well, my father was in the Federal Aviation Administration, and the result of that is for you to move up the government service rating, you need to move out. And so at the age of 5, we moved our family to New Jersey, where my Southern drawl became a detriment to my survival.
How so?
Well, I don't know. You've probably been to New Jersey. They don't speak Southern drawl very well there, and they don't accept people that speak Southern drawl there very well. And so it was a hurdle to become integrated into the classes I was moving into.
And at 5 anyway, that's kind of a tough transition.
It was a very tough transition. You know, there's emotional maturity and development issues you go through at that age, and I think because of that, and it put me into an adversarial position, which I think hindered my development.
And then you moved to New Mexico 5 years later at age 10, and did you fit in there more comfortably?
Well, I had just gotten rid of my Southern drawl, and I think I could have done better with a Southern drawl than a New Jersey accent when I was in New Mexico. And my father decided to move us to Belen, New Mexico, which is 30 miles south of Albuquerque. And really, I was about the only blue-eyed Caucasian guy in the school, and again, it was tough, but I think because of the experience I had in New Jersey, I learned to cope better in that situation. And although on the first day of school I got into a fight, as I stood my ground from that point forward, I tend to have a group of friends that I could fit in with.
So you sort of found a way to make that work. Were you comfortable?
Well, no. I mean, I'm not crying for myself, but I do know what it feels like to be discriminated against purely on the basis of your skin color.
Yeah, which probably helps as you're doing employment and doing all of those things. You sort of take all those skills with you, I think.
I think coping and verbal skills and learning how to talk yourself out of any fight you can get into is really helpful.
Yeah. Then 3 years later, you moved to Wyoming. What brought that move about?
Well, my parents divorced, and my mom remarried, and he was in the construction industry, and Wyoming is a big petroleum state, and they happen to be in the boom cycle. And that was a very, I think, closed community as compared to where I was before even. And we moved there to follow that construction industry, and that's really what I call home.
It's Wyoming.
Is Wyoming.
So how did it feel there?
Very cold. It gets very, very cold in Wyoming, and the wind always blows. And I still had an outcast mentality because now I'm entering junior high school with no friends and starting, trying to build those friendships. I guess the good news is that, from a race standpoint, I was not a minority. But I had to learn to create new situations, new friends, and for myself.
So with all those challenges growing up, what are some of the skills that you think you got from that have been helpful?
Well, I think coping. I learned to deal with change very well, and I think a lot of people are afraid of change. And my wife and I, who've been married for 13 years now. We finally had this epiphany that every 3 or 5 years I want to move somewhere because I'm done with where I am. And she, for her whole life, lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so it didn't hit us until 13 years into our relationship that was what was driving me, that moving was my background, and hers was constant, the same thing over and over again. And so I think it learned me to adapt to change. And I think really the ability to adapt to change is probably one of the best skills you can have in life.
Especially if you're going to be in this kind of industry.
Yes, very dynamic, very up and down, turbulent industry.
So once you got comfortable in Wyoming, what were you like in high school?
Well, in high school, I was a hick. I mean, as you could best explain it. I was not doing well in junior high, and I remember I must have ditched class or something and missed an assignment that I was supposed to do, and so the teacher gave me a presentation that I was supposed to give. She gave me a topic. I have no idea what it was about now. And I remember that I hadn't prepared well for it, and so at the last minute I crammed and I created this presentation, and out of this my teacher decided that I needed to be in forensics. Forensics, for those, is not the study of dead bodies necessarily, but organized speaking. And so I went into coming out of junior high. My two passions, well, my only passion really was metal shop. So going into high school, I was in forensics, which is traditionally an academic discipline, and metal shop were my two disciplines.
And how did that work in terms of friends? And I imagine those were two very different groups of people.
Well, I was not very well accepted in school, in high school, when I entered high school. I liked to do muzzle loading and dress up in leathers and go mountain man stuff and kill stuff, and that appealed to a certain group of people.
You didn't mention that when we talked
before.
I'm
sorry. Legally kill stuff.
Much better. Much better.
And so that was a small group of people that I ran with. We had trucks, and we liked to cruise the strip and peel out and drink beer and do all the stuff that most kids do, I suppose, still today. But forensics actually had a broader base of support throughout the school because it touched the jocks and the academics and all the other cliques, that are in the school. And so as I emerged in high school, we got very good at what we did. And then we started winning tournaments, and then we started traveling nationally, and ultimately that's what took me to college. And as a result of that, I can remember no more dramatic exit from high school than the entrance. On the exit from high school, I went to prom with the valedictorian, as opposed to coming into it, and I was cruising the strip with a bunch of hicks.
Right. So when did you first realize you were smart?
Well, I don't know that I'm smart.
Well, let me say, I'll tell you you're smart. Besides right now, when did you first realize it?
Well, I think that's a very elusive thing to individually believe, and so quite honestly, I struggle with that always. I think what I came to understand was that the skills that I learned through organized speaking really gave me a leg up on a lot of people, because people don't have the ability to articulate themselves, and so they don't get what they want oftentimes.
So describe your dilemma regarding your next move.
So it was pretty straightforward. I come from a broken home. My mom and I lived in a trailer house in Mountain View, Wyoming. We were trailer trash as best I can estimate. There was a hole in the floor going down the trailer that you had to avoid stepping into or you'd fall outside. And the easiest path would be for me to go into a trade school and then hone my welding skills, because quite frankly, my two passions, even on exit, still were forensics and metal shop. And even going through the last year of high school, I was creating all sorts of things like wood burning stoves and stuff like that. And I just love that. I just love the act of creation. I think it's great. And
now again, forensics is debate, pretty much.
Forensics for me was cross-examination debate. I didn't like humor or oration or extemporaneous speaking or any of that. But cross-examination debate. And so the road most traveled would have taken me through trade school. And I think, quite frankly, given how harsh that environment is, maybe give me a lifespan of 45 or 50 years, and die of some lung disease or something. And then, but our senior year, we happened to do quite well in the state debate tournament, and that actually, after the fact, I came to understand that I got a scholarship to the University of Wyoming. And they told me that, and I'm like, really? I get, and what does it entail? And I found out that I got a tuition scholarship, which was a substantial amount of money to me. I figured I could live. I mean, I worked all through high school. I was an assistant manager at Long John Silver's, of all places. I mean, I worked everywhere. I was a fast food king. So I knew I could put myself through college, from the standpoint of just having food money and stuff like that. And so at the last minute, I just made a gut decision. What do I want to do more in life? Do I want to go down this path as a welder, or do I want to try something in school? And luckily, I had a big brother from the Big Brothers Big Sisters program who was an attorney. And he said, that's a good decision. You should go that way.
Well, you soon found yourself on academic probation from this very good decision that you made. How did that happen?
Well, I really hadn't blossomed until my first semester freshman year in college, and the debate team loved to party, and I got sucked into that trap, and we did a fair amount of partying and drinking, and had a really good time. And I also decided to live off campus my first semester, which I think is a huge mistake because going from what was relatively structured living with my mom to off-campus living was a huge transition for me. And I just found myself sitting around the apartment or at the bar, one or the other, not doing a lot of anything. And really, I didn't know why I was in school. I didn't know what I wanted to be there for, and it didn't really capture my imagination at all.
And you described this as a wake-up call. What did you do about it?
Well, I was presented with the dilemma of losing my tuition scholarship, obviously, and that would have put me out of school for sure. And I just started to think about I talked to a lot of people before I went to college, welders, for example, and I said, this is not right. I need to do something. All my life, I lived without. And I would like for a chance to have an opportunity to live with. And so I made a decision to move on to campus, move into the dormitories, and try to apply myself. Now, I wish it was as clean as that sounds. It still wasn't all that clean. But I started to take it more seriously. And at the same time, I was debating in college because of the scholarship, and we were doing quite well in our debate as well, and that was getting me more and more excited about what my opportunities were and teaching me about what I could do, political science, go to law school, and those sorts of things.
One of the things that surprised me is when you talked about debaters as being a rebellious group. I wouldn't tend to think of them that way. So talk more about that profile.
Oh, wow. I mean, our debate team, we were very rebellious. I mean, we voted for the class song in our high school to be Lola from the Kinks. So if that doesn't give you an idea of how rebellious we were. We loved The Who and the Stones and heavy metal, and we lived this dual life. The one life was I was with a group of ultra smart people who could argue you into any corner they wanted to, and that's what my wife argues about me today, is that all I have to do is pick a side and I get to win. That's my biggest choice, is to pick the side. Because you learn to be quite persuasive with limited facts and statistics. But on the other hand, we were this very lively partying group on the other hand.
So of the options that were open to you, which one did you decide to follow as a major?
Well, I was really into philosophy. I mean, that was my favorite thing. And I was still in a phase of self-discovery about religion, about ethics, about politics. So, on the one hand, philosophy attracted me a lot. On the other hand, political science attracted me a lot. What didn't attract me the whole lot was law school. One day I was my dad is a technocrat, so he's a geek. And one day I decided to buy a Timex Sinclair 1000, which for those who are too young don't know it, but it was this little keyboard computer that you plugged into a TV set with a little chiclet keyboard on it, and you could write basic programs. And I taught myself how to program, and that's where I came to understand that what I was doing in debate was basically constructing arguments and then anticipating responses and constructing counter-arguments ad nauseum. And that is exactly the same skill you need to craft computer software.
What was Dynamic Software Designers?
Well, it was a very rebellious group of my debate partner, who we won the tournament that got us into college. And I and another gentleman were writing software. It was our first entrepreneurial initiative. It was, hey, you know, this is really cool stuff. We can write this software, and look at what's out on the market today. This is back in, what would this be, 83, I guess, 84. There was really not very good software on the market then. The Mac hadn't come out to the market just yet, and the Apple IIe was really the big computer out there. And the software for the Apple II series was awful. And we could write way better software, and we started doing that, and we found a publisher out of Michigan who would take our software. We would spend 8-10 weeks just nose to the grindstone writing this software in a totally vacuum environment that involved a lot of partying. And then we would ship it off to this guy, and then he would send it to someone else to test it. And he would pay us what we thought was a large sum of money to do this.
And did this take you away from school?
It threatened to. We did it through one semester of school, and then we exited into the summer, and we decided not to do the summer semester, and we went off and moved up to Casper again and got an apartment there, all three of us, and we were writing software for the Apple II, the Apple Mac, and the IBM. And we spent a whole summer doing that, and we also spent a whole summer of living in close quarters with one another, and that's very tough. And we realized we didn't like each other as much as we thought we did. We liked each other, but not that much. And we also realized that we were burning out. I mean, to make this work, we were burning out. And we felt like we didn't have all the skills we needed. And so I made a decision at the end of the summer that I really needed to go back and finish up computer science and give myself a chance.
So after graduation, you started looking for a job. What happened?
Boy, this is 88. Bad downturn in the economy, no jobs. I wasn't a particularly stellar undergraduate student. I would call myself average at best, keeping in mind the first year that I had to overcome to get there. In the meantime, during my senior year, I had been taking graduate courses as well, so my interest was starting to peak towards, hey, you know what, the undergraduate stuff's okay. But the graduate stuff's where the fun begins. And I felt pretty dejected that I'd sent my resume out to so many places, and I wasn't getting the kind of response back that I wanted. And I made a decision, you know, it's not generally the path that you're supposed to take, but I had a great professor in college, and I went into his office one day and I said, you know what, I didn't want to do this, but I'm thinking about doing this now. Dr. Henry Bauer, I still remember the conversation. He said, you know, you're right, you should stay, but you're wrong, you shouldn't do that, you should do this. And he was right about both of those things.
What was that and what was this?
Well, I wanted to go in and build a computer. I had this image in my mind of a massively parallel computer. But he, in his defense, he didn't want me to do it because that would have taken me out of his department and put me in the electrical engineering department. So. But he talked me into doing software for a similar sort of arrangement, and he had some great ideas, and that's really what led to where I've come today.
So again, as you were saying, that it's not necessarily the optimal path to go directly from your undergraduate through graduate, nor is it the optimal path to necessarily stay at the same school where you were. Obviously, it worked out really well for you. What are some of the things that you think you did to leverage the path that you decided to take?
Well, I think you can add another negative there, which is most people think you shouldn't go to Wyoming for anything. So I went to the wrong school. I stayed there, and I went in the same discipline, and I got my graduate degree. You know what? You can learn whatever you want anywhere. Some of the most brilliant works in history have been done in a total vacuum. And I guess if you use the institution as your crutch, you should probably look a little deeper. And from my perspective, I found that there was a certain aspect of computing that really excited me, which was make it go faster, make things that seemed implausible, if not impossible, be possible. And we also, what I learned at that school was we had a fabulous petroleum engineering department. And that's where all the money went to. It didn't come to computer science. It didn't go to English literature. It didn't go to history. It went into studying petroleum engineering technologies. And so they had access to mainframe computers, Cray computers, all these supercomputers. And so in hindsight, yeah, Wyoming is not the school to go to for that. But again, you can learn whatever you want, where you want. It takes initiative, and I took the initiative.
Tell us about your master's thesis and how that kind of got you out.
Well, the master's thesis was part of that conversation I had with Dr. Bauer about me wanting to stay in school and wanting to do this and him convincing me to do that. And my master's thesis, there's really two courses. I suspect it's probably similar here at the University of Washington. There's two courses of action. You can do essentially a glorified book report, or you can do an original research thesis. And most people do the book report. It's easy. You don't seem to get any extra credit for going the original research route. And if you do original research, you get crushed by all the PhDs because
you're contradicting.
Because you're stupid.
Right.
You're an undergrad trying to get a master's degree. And I opted to do original research. And that original research really put me out. I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was just having fun. I mean, I was having the time of my life doing this stuff. And it really put me out at the forefront of what was going on in that particular realm of computing. And ultimately, it enabled me to publish my research in a national forum, which then really catapulted my career opportunities. When I came out of Wyoming, I was able to really pretty much write my own ticket. And we're still in an economic downturn. This is, again, because I had done most of my graduate work as an undergrad, I only needed another year. And so in 1989,
not much better.
Yeah, it pretty much was the same situation all over again. But I sent my resume out this time, and I had a more focused group of companies because I knew what I wanted to do more. And my credentials were pretty much flawless at that point in time. So we had agencies of the government like the NSA, all the way through private industries wanting to attract me.
So what did you end up accepting, and why did you accept that position?
Well, I hate to admit it, I did take the road less traveled again, or most traveled, should I say. I did go, as a graduate student, I was able to convince a company to fund my thesis research, which my debate skills came in handy for. And they funded my thesis research, and when I graduated, they offered me a job to follow up and work on my thesis, and that was a company.
And what was the focus of your thesis?
The focus of my research was to be able to take a serial program, a normal computer program, and make it operate many times faster running across multiple processors or a single processor that had multiple functional units. So to really, they call it parallelization, to make a program run in parallel when it was written to run in serial.
So the position that you accepted was just taking this one step further?
Well, that was the initial theory. I quickly found out that private enterprises are much more fluid than academics.
Yeah, you
and
think?
so my ability to adapt to change came in very handy. This was a company that had recently gone public.
Called?
I didn't know much about it. Topologics. I didn't even know what going public meant. And they listed on this thing called the NASDAQ, and
Everyone
the
was very
CEO
excited,
was driving around in an M3. Seemed pretty cool to me. They brought me in. The Topologics, by its name, was a company that had a concept that you could take a computing program and map it onto different topologies of computing. A topology computing really refers to how the processors are connected with one another. Simply, they could be connected in a ring or a line of processors, and tasks can be handed to different processors. And they had this goal of being able to take any computing problem you had and to map it onto any topology That's the good news. The bad news is they never really figured out how to do it. And in fact, they had sold this concept to many customers, and as hard as they had tried, nobody had solved that problem. And the company was not doing well financially. We got into one of these brainstorming meetings with the CEO on down, and someone said, we really need to solve this problem. Will anyone volunteer to solve this problem? And I said, that doesn't sound too hard. And I said, with the caveat that it's a limited number of processors and yada, yada, yada. And so over a period of several weeks, I was able to crack this problem for them, which had nothing to do with my thesis research, but it really seemed like a really cool problem that they were trying to solve. And it really, after I left the company, they were able to apply the technology beyond the scale that I had originally envisioned.
So now you're a star. Why did you decide to leave the company?
Well, it was a little thing about self-preservation. I got that notice that they weren't sure they were going to be able to meet payroll. And payroll to me was a very, very important thing. Again, I wished that I was rich coming out of grad school, but I wasn't. And in fact, I had student loans, and I had to pay much more expensive apartment rent than I used to, and there wasn't a cafeteria that served all-you-can-eat pizza and Fruit Loops, so it was pretty tough coming out of school. And my wife-to-be, we were living together, and we had to provide for one another, and it just wasn't working out to go paycheck to paycheck with this company, and we made a decision that we needed to move.
Well, at this point in your life, you were also making an East Coast, West Coast dilemma. Can you explain why you had that dilemma and how you resolved it?
Yeah, I think it was an East Coast, West Coast dilemma, not for the traditional computer science, do I go to Cambridge, Boston, or do I go to Silicon Valley? It was, my wife had a degree in international finance, and she was being dragged towards New York. And she wasn't my wife at the time, but we were living together. Which her parents don't know, so you can edit that out.
Now that you've said it 2 or 3 times, I'm not sure we can.
They know now. My career was really taking me to Silicon Valley. And it was one of those rather unromantic days. We're sitting in their bedroom just talking, and it's like, I don't like this. You're constantly thinking about interviews in New York, and I'm constantly thinking about interviews in Silicon Valley. We should either call it quits or make it happen. And that was my way of proposing.
Very romantic.
And it was quite romantic.
I don't know how anyone could turn that down.
Yeah, neither do I. She didn't, though. And so we decided we'd get married. She moved back with her family. Unfortunately, that prior March, about 6 months earlier, her brother had died in an F-16 crash. And so her family was very distraught. And so she moved back in with their family. Meanwhile, I'm interviewing on the West Coast for jobs. And luckily, the afterglow of my master's work hadn't worn off yet. And I was able pretty much to write my own ticket in Silicon Valley. And so what we did was, in a period of 3 months, we got married. Actually, a period of 3 weeks as it played out, and lots of preparation. But 1 week we got married, 1 week we went on our honeymoon, and the next week we moved to Silicon Valley with all of our belongings and started a whole new life.
And what company did you eventually go to work for?
I worked for a company called Intergraph, a graphical workstation company.
And what was your initial role with them?
Well, it was to do pretty much what my thesis research was all about, unfortunately. Actually, fortunately there, I got some momentum doing that. As it turns out, the supercomputing industry proved to be in quite a bit of despair. Defense spending cutting was resulting in cutbacks in spending on supercomputers, and that was really just rippling its way through the entire supercomputing industry. At the same time, though, we had the advent of these really graphically rich workstations that the PC's kind of grown up to be today. But at the time, the Sun workstations and the Intergraph workstations and Evans and Sutherland and Silicon Graphics. And they were being powered by a new generation of chips that were actually little supercomputers on a single chip. And so all the techniques that I had developed in my master's thesis were completely applicable. And so they brought me in to apply those techniques to help them differentiate themselves from the Suns and the Silicon Graphics of the world.
So what were you most excited about in starting this job?
Well, gosh, what was I most excited about? Well, paycheck, I think, was the big thing. But also, my career has been a push and a pull thing. what I want to do is I want to be an individual contributor. I love to contribute. I like to get in and rub elbows with the engineers and just get in there and solve problems and be one of the key guys. Or girls or whatever, but I mean, I wanted to be one of the key contributors on the program. And at the same time, though, I think basically my communication skills naturally led me towards a leadership role. And I found that more stressful, less fulfilling than being the person that wrote the great piece of software that did such and such. And so one of my great accomplishments there was I was going back into an individual contributor role where I was respected for that individual contribution.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about your first project with the company.
Well, my first project unfortunately ended up turning, we had a big defense contract. And it was a big Navy contract, $300 some odd million. And they needed to meet this certain benchmark in order to win this contract. And there were many different criteria they had to pass in order to be successful in winning the bid. But the particular thing that they needed to achieve really lent itself well to the techniques that I had developed in my master's thesis. So I advised the president of our division that if I had this, this, and this, that I could probably beat that number. Mm-hmm. And so, I think without any other prospects on the forefront, they said, okay, well, go do it.
Yeah.
So I was actually sequestered in Huntsville, Alabama. Keep in mind, I'm working out of Palo Alto, California, but the headquarters of Intergraph happens to be in Huntsville. And I was sequestered there for several weeks where we brought up these new techniques, and ultimately we were able to achieve that benchmark number and beat it. And as a result of the corporation achieving all the other metrics, we were able to win that large government contract.
You said that you got a series of battlefield promotions. Now, how do those differ from non-combat promotions?
They're not as fulfilling. The pay raises don't tend to follow them. You tend to feel a little bit set up when they happen because you come into a very high pressure situation where somebody's not working out, that something is generally on the line. This is private enterprise. I believe that if there was no pressure, nothing was on the line, probably nobody would get fired in a company. But and sometimes you end up taking out your own boss, and in the meantime, and so you end up accumulating these larger and larger organizations that don't really benefit from forethought. What does it mean? What are the implications? Is this a decent span of control for this individual to be able to manage? You lose that ability to be an individual contributor now. If you're not moving the pieces on the chessboard, if you're just the pawn, then the pawn is moving, but everyone else is staying in the same place, and you're not very beneficial to the overall team. So, those are a lot of the trade-offs that you run into.
So now you went into this job because you wanted to be an individual contributor, and there it happens again.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you like about the managerial role?
Well, I mean, there is a sense of fulfillment, but I have a hard time assuming credit for the credit of others. Mm-hmm. I love seeing people accomplish. I love seeing people accomplish beyond what they believed they could at a level they believed they could accomplish at. And so I think there's something very fulfilling about that. I think there's something fulfilling about people turning to you for guidance, but then going off on their own and being creative and solving the problems. Because no leader, as brilliant as they are, knows everything. And really what you can most hope to provide, I believe, is as structured of an environment as you can afford them, with as much benefit of history and knowledge as you can provide them.
So what is an Intergraph Fellow, and what would you have to do to become one?
Well, I just basically said, I'm tired of being in this role. I was managing people in Huntsville, Alabama. I was managing people in Palo Alto, California. At the same time, I came to understand that as we transitioned our product line at Intergraph to Windows NT, which was a lot of companies were doing back in, I guess this would be 92, 93, that I realized that Intel was going to clean their clocks, and including in intergraphs. And so I told, and at this point in time, I had gotten into a relationship with the CEO of Intergraph, and I just said, look, I think it's time for me to move on. I'm not happy. I don't agree with a lot of the decisions that are happening. And the CEO said, well, you could be an Intergraph fellow. And I'm like, man, that sounds pretty darn good. What is an Intergraph fellow? And they said, well, we don't know, but as soon as you move to Huntsville, you can make it whatever you want. And I'm like, excuse me? Move to Huntsville, Alabama? I have nothing against Huntsville except 110 degrees. And so my wife and I actually did make a stab at it. We went out on the recruiting trip, and we stayed in the company housing, which felt like government housing, and we went and looked at the really glamour houses, huge glamour houses on 48-hole golf courses, and it was 110 degrees, and the dirt was red everywhere you looked. It was just red. That's all Liz and I remember about this place, is it was just very red. And we tried it, and I'd lost my Southern accent long before then. And Liz didn't feel comfortable growing up in the Midwest, up in Minnesota. And we just said, it is time for us to move.
And where did you go?
Well, at this point in time, though, we still had nothing to our name because we lived in Palo Alto, California, which was too expensive to live in. But it was really nice, and it was very safe as far as peninsula places go in Silicon Valley. We decided we were going to make a lifestyle move, not a career move. And so what we did is we just picked out a number of locations, Denver again, because we really liked the Rockies. I grew up in the Rockies. We were comfortable with it. We both liked the winter sports. We looked at Austin, Texas, because Austin, Texas was a high-tech hub. They got great blues music, good partying. What the heck, you can't do much worse than that. And then we looked at Seattle. And we said, let's target our jobs in these areas, and let's lead with my career and not hers. And so we just sent out resumes everywhere, and we got 2 or 3 offers up here, and we decided to move up to Bellevue and work for a company called DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation.
What about the DEC offer appealed to you the most?
Well, as throughout my career, that natural tension between being an individual contributor and being a manager appealed to me. And at that point in time, I got to go to DEC and be an individual and contribute as a team member.
What were black projects?
Well, the thing that they didn't tell me, they told me I was working on the Black Project, but I just thought, that's just another code name. The computer industry's full of them. But it really meant it was the Black Project. Nobody knew about it. It was not funded as a line item in the budget. It came out of a bunch of slough funds across the organization. And it was to develop a whole new series of compilers, C compilers, to run across the Unix operating system, the VMS operating system, and the Windows NT operating system that DEC was developing. And it would be the only compilers that they had that ran across those. A very noble cause.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, very noble. The lead developer, the first day, quit.
Nice.
And the team began imploding pretty rapidly at that point.
But you were only there about 18 months before you decided to leave. What happened?
Well, this is where it hit me. Again, the natural tension of my life to take me from individual contributor into management took a hold at DEC West. Between the things that I had learned at Intergraph and DEC West, I came up with an idea for a business that ultimately became Bsquare. And the epiphany that I was always going to be in a leadership role hit me, and I came to the conclusion that if I'm going to lead, I'm going to lead it on my own. I'm going to do my own thing. And I had this great idea about doing what we were doing both at DEC West and at Intergraph that was of great benefit to both Microsoft and companies like DEC. And so I decided that although I am not a firm advocate of job hopping, this was clearly a tough decision for me, that I needed to go off and do my own thing.
How did you arrive at the corporate name?
Bsquare. Well, it's a long tortured name. Back when I when I worked for Topologics, I had published a grant proposal for the National Science Foundation. And the grant proposal was accepted after I left Topologics, which left them in a lurch. If they wanted the $75,000 or whatever it was, then they needed me in order to satisfy it. So they called me up and I said, okay, I can do that in my part-time. I got permission. And I began working on this grant, on the research that was this grant about. And I needed a corporate shelter, a consulting company in order to do that. And Liz and I, my wife and I, came up with a company called Baxter Consulting. So that was really the original genesis, if you will, of the Bsquare name. When we resurrected it after we came to Washington State, it wasn't going to be about Bill and Liz anymore. And furthermore, I had played a lot with the Baxter name because I liked the idea of a founder affiliation. Because after all, when you found a company, pretty much the initial customers are doing business with you, not your company. So you want that founder affiliation, but not to the extent that if someday you decide to leave, it would harm the corporation. So I had been playing around with it for a long time, and what I came to recognize, there's a number of values I respect and I love in this world. And one is to be straightforward, honest, and sincere. And that's really where Bsquare came from, to be square, to be straightforward, honest, and sincere. And that's really what the name really engenders.
When you started Bsquare, what was the focus of the company?
The focus of Bsquare was really a synthesis of what I had learned at my prior two companies, at Intergraph and at DEC, where we were providing these highly technical services related to Microsoft Windows operating systems. And we were able to apply what we learned at those companies to be able to provide the same set of services for what Microsoft was going to be doing in the future.
In terms of starting a company, what was hard that you expected to be easy, and what was easy that you expected to be hard?
Well, I mean, growth was hard. Growth was very hard. We kept signing up customer after customer after customer. It was the woe is me. Oh no, not another customer. We can't handle this. What was then? So that was easy. Signing up all those customers, satisfying the demand was very hard for us. Also, just the mechanical formation of a company, having bookkeeping and having HR and keeping toilet paper in the bathroom. We'd make our weekly run to Costco and just load up a Volvo full of just stuff, all sorts of stuff, and mostly candy, M&Ms, crackers, sodas, but toilet paper and stuff like that, the mundane stuff. And then also, from my perspective, I was an individual contributor, and largely the reason why the company was founded, though I had two partners, Al and Peter, I had to be an individual contributor. I mean, a significant portion of the value proposition that we pitched as Bsquare didn't exist, except only in my mind.
Right.
I knew it could exist, but it didn't exist. And so I had to manage these personalities in an environment of total uncertainty. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen to Bsquare tomorrow. I can tell you what's going to happen today. I can tell you what you're supposed to do tomorrow, but I have no clue. We're on a big trip together, and you better just buck it up and go with me on it, or we need to get someone new in to go with it. And so that was very difficult. I'm being torn between business development, between HR, luckily one of my partners was great at accounting, or at least he wanted to be good at accounting, and he learned Peachtree and got really good at it. And so we just kind of divvied up all the crap work, that you could think of in a company, and the crap work, as I've learned now as a CEO, is really what makes a company work.
Yep.
It's not all that other stuff, unfortunately.
And then about 5 years later, you decided to go public. What were the advantages and disadvantages of that decision?
Well, I mean, we were growing very rapidly. I mean, we had taken on outside investors who shared in our dream of a world that would see appliance-like devices everywhere, that there would be many more appliance-like devices, computing devices in your home than PCs. They shared in that dream and they invested in the company. Well, and largely that investment was for founder liquidity. We had been working very, very hard, really on essentially the payroll you'd get as the roles we were playing in the organization, not with the real perks of having founded a company. And where that came from was through liquidity through these private fundings. And so, but the double-edged sword of that then was that they expected liquidity of their own. You don't buy stock at $1.80 a share unless you're going to sell it at, in those days, $10 a share.
Right.
They wanted a 5-bagger, as they called it, or whatever. They didn't want a 20% return on their investment. If they wanted that, they'd go and invest in stocks and bonds and a diversified portfolio. So that put a lot of pressure on us to continue to ratchet up profitability, as opposed to just having that lifestyle business that we had, and to ultimately achieve some sort of liquidity event, which really meant you either sell your company or you go public. And having founded the company, there was just no dream that I would give it up to another entity. Right. This was my baby. My wife came to work with me at employee 16 and left at employee 150 or something. I mean, we really raised this thing and we really wanted it to be ours. But, either way we went, we found out it wasn't ours anymore. That's right. That we went public and we lost it. It was the public's company. Yeah, I own, I don't know, 10, 15% of it, maybe. But, I've got other people that own 10, 15% of it. And so it really changed the nature of the business.
The business for you. How has the focus of the company shifted over the years? What are you working on now?
Well, we have completely changed. I will liken what we did in the early days of Bsquare as to what happened after World War II when we were building highways in the United States. You don't build them more than once, really, and then you resurface them and you go back and fix a bridge here and something there. But the fact of the matter is, once you've made that massive infrastructural investment that we've made, you better have something else to turn to, or else you're going to go away. And we realized that we needed to diversify the business in 96, 97. So we began to migrate away from being just the provider of the low-level tools that helped you develop for this operating system that ultimately became Windows CE, but that you also turn to us for the applications and the real value-added functionality when you're using these devices that you'd be looking for. And we quickly became the #1 provider of applications for the market. Unfortunately, when we did that back in 96, 97, there was absolutely no market for these devices beyond geeks like myself. I loved them. I mean, I looked like Buck Rogers in the 21st century. I mean, I had these things hanging off my hips. I had them in my car. I had them everywhere, and they were just awesome. Very frustrating, but awesome nonetheless. And really, there weren't many of me, unfortunately, to buy our software.
How would you describe your management style now that you've kind of given up on the individual contributor thing?
Well, I mean, the biggest key to management is trust. As an individual contributor, you don't have to have a whole lot of that. There's this old saying, there's no I in team, but there sure is a whole lot of me. There was a lot of me in our team when I was just a team member. And I knew that if this person failed, then all I'd have to do is work 10 more hours over a couple of weeks and I could fix that problem and the project would ultimately succeed. And that was, I didn't have the trust I needed of those team members in order to be as successful as I needed to be, I believe. But as you move into management and into team leadership roles, you realize that there are a bunch of individuals in there and that you need to trust them individually as well as a team in order to do what they need to do. And sometimes that means going against what you believe. I haven't written a substantial amount of code for 4 years. I still believe I know a lot about programming and about where the technologies are going, but I have developers that are far smarter than I am, that are far more knowledgeable, and I just have to give it up and say, look, I mean, after the argument is done, I have to be willing to say, you know, I could be wrong and I need to trust you.
Mm-hmm. You have an interesting philosophy that respect is deserved and disrespect is earned. How do you make that real within the culture of a company?
It's very difficult, you know, and not everyone agrees with me on this. Even some of my early partners in the company did not agree with the philosophy that that respect is an a priori thing, that somebody deserves it, and then they have the ability through their own actions to break down that respect. To operationalize that in an organization, I think, first of all, it has to be leadership from the top. You have to show respect to everyone throughout your organization. A company like Bsquare is sometimes criticized because we're very engineering-centric. But what we do to go out of our way in many instances is to try to prove that, hey, there are a lot of skills, there are a lot of roles in the organization that if it were not for those roles, that this organization would not exist. Mm-hmm. You cannot create ideas in a vacuum and just hope that somebody's going to show up at your doorstep and put a bucket of money at your feet. You need salespeople, you need front desk people, you need finance people. All sorts of people are needed. And so in an organization, especially in an engineering-centric organization, one of the best ways is to show cross-disciplinary respect. And I think as you bring people into your organization and as you interview them, that is your chance to say, look, I interviewed you. I brought you into this company. You are now part of this family. You have a chance. And I trust you and I respect you. But, you know, the first 6 months is critical. You need to demonstrate that that was well placed.
We'll take questions from the audience right after this break.
The University of Washington Business School, located in Seattle, Washington, ranks among the top business schools in the United States. Information Technology Leaders is one of the many ways the UW Business School forges partnerships and reaches out beyond the university. For more information about the University of Washington Business School or Information Technology Leaders, visit informationtechnologyleaders.com.
Hi. What's the most valuable thing you learned in school?
The most valuable thing I learned, I think being able to speak in front of people is probably the most valuable thing I learned, because it allows you to articulate what you need and what you want and how you want things done so that it's clear to people, it's unambiguous, and it's really led to my ability to be able to grow an organization. I think secondarily to that, what I learned in school is that it's not where you are, it's what you want. It's what your heart tells you. And so if you're not driven, if you don't want to learn something, it doesn't matter if you're at Harvard or at the University of Wyoming, you're probably going to get the same amount out of it.
You spoke earlier about how growing up, moving so much, that you got to a point where you kind of began to get that itch where the change and the moving really kind of started to drive you as an attraction towards you. And I'm just curious if being here in Seattle for such a long period of time, if you ever got that itch to move or to expand your business at all, take it other places.
Well, that's a very astute observation. It has been 10 years now since I've lived, in fact, 10 years minus a couple of months that I've lived in Seattle. And in fact, the epiphany that my wife had about her realizing that I, want to move so often because that's what I did as a kid and that's what I became comfortable with, changed the dynamics of it. And her having that tension that she loves Bellevue. I mean, there is somebody that loves Bellevue. It's my wife. She sees herself there the rest of her life. And so we had to have a long conversation, a series of conversations about how we're going to satisfy my need for change and new things and hers. And so we do travel a fair amount. I mean, we've been all around. We've been lucky enough to travel, and we go up to Whistler a fair amount, and we just got back from heliboarding up in British Columbia for a week. So we get to travel a lot, and I think that really, gives me the outlets I need for change. As a company, though, we are a global company. I get to go all over the world: Beijing, Taiwan, South Korea. I've been in so many places
cool.
that it really satisfies a need for me to see the world and to see change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to close with a quote from one of the early Bsquare employees. Many companies founded in the 90s were started by marketing people and were based more on hype than technology. But Bill is an extremely smart technology guy. He saw a real opportunity and has created a sustainable, nimble business. I think one of the challenges earlier on was resisting his urge to code. Bill can architect and implement code much better and quicker than most developers. We solved this by being sure to hire the best developers we could find, so Bill could stay focused on the business side of things. It's one example of Bill's ability to see an issue, even inside himself, and quickly and decisively solve it. As he grew into his role, I saw him take that decisive nature and make many difficult calls, but he always infused them with honesty, integrity, sincerity, and kindness. He never loses sight of the fact that people have placed their trust in him, and he always makes them proud.